Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the Happytime Murders. I think one of the things with this movie that you kind of have to give it credit for is there's not a lot of movies like this, and what this movie is really doing for the medium itself. Now, before you go to the comments and go, hey Jim, what about Team America or Meet the Feebles or what have you? Yes, inappropriate puppets have been done before. I know there's like other examples of movies, like grosser movies I don't know as much about, but being that we don't get a lot of those, particularly in the multiplex. I mean, Team America was in 2004, which was 14 years ago. It's not like this is something that happens every day. This is kind of a unique release in effect, and I think it does actually expand the medium. I mean, we don't get a lot of puppet movies anyway, but to get R-rated or more inappropriate puppet movies, I think in of itself, basically, just because it exists, you're like, hey, you actually did it. That's actually a pretty big accomplishment, to be honest. But I don't think this movie does anything with the rarefied air it gets to breathe. This movie is just like, hey, we're inappropriate. And much like any kind of adult animated films, they're like pushing boundaries. They're saying, you know, fuck a lot. They're doing a lot of sex jokes and sex sight gags and things. This is no different from things like Nerdland or Sausage Party or things like that, where you sort of want them to be better than they are. And I'm sure it's like those kind of DVDs, if people still have DVDs or whatever, that someone who barely watches movies recommends to you, be like, oh yeah, but if you check this out, and you're like, well, I have, but you don't want to say that because they're sort of weird. And this is like kind of one of those movies. It'll have probably a cult following just because there really isn't that much like it, but that doesn't make it good. And I think this movie relies too much on that. Now, the big difference between this and kind of the previous kind of at least studio film that was an R-rated puppet film, I guess, would be Team America. But the big difference between this and Team America is Team America has a lot more to offer. Sure, it's an inappropriate puppet movie. That's in there. That's definitely part of the draw. But I think the other thing with it is it has these amazing songs. It's really about something, saying things about North Korea and the war in Iraq and, you know, politics at the time and Michael Bay movies. And there's like all these ideas going on throughout it. Happytime Murders is basically like, hey, we're inappropriate, and there's this film noir thing, which we don't really do that much with. And we're sort of like a Roger Rabbit type thing, but with puppets. And that's a whole other problem, because movies that try to be like, hey, we're like the video game Roger Rabbit or the puppet Roger Rabbit or the Roger Rabbit only starring people, which is basically just Chinatown, but whatever. It never works out as well as Roger Rabbit, except, I mean, Chinatown was like really good. Roger Rabbit had so many amazing people involved in it and so many ideas, and it's almost a miracle that thing works as well as it does, because it's just like all the level of craftsmen at their peak working on this thing, and the fact that everybody thinks that they can fucking do that. Roger Rabbit was a once-in-a-lifetime type of fucking movie. It's like never gonna happen again, and the fact that we keep trying to do that is kind of pathetic. And I think Happytime Murders like doesn't do anything with film noir. It's like it sort of does. It has the narration and stuff. It's not really using the genre. I'm like half convinced this is one of those times where a director goes like, I know film noir. I saw Double Indemnity like at least once, I think, and I can just go off that, and didn't like study anything and think about that. And then the whole idea of like puppets being basically like minorities or something, like, which would be, you know, from even things like Alienation or the recent Netflix movie Bright, it kind of like hints at, doesn't go into fully, doesn't do anything with. I find this film disappointing, but I think the negativity towards it is a little too far. Because sure, I knew before I saw it, it was going to maybe not be my favorite movie, and it's going to say a lot of inappropriate words and do a lot of inappropriate things too much, because if you're a puppeteer, they don't get to do stuff like this a lot, so they're clearly like going all in on this. And you can feel that throughout it, and I'm used to animated films who do that. And Happytime Murders does that too much, but it's honestly not that funny, which I think is the other problem with that kind of humor, is you have all this pent-upness, and you like have to make inappropriate jokes or have to make sex jokes. The pent-upness is kind of like washed out your brain, and you're not thinking of making a sex joke that's good, you're just thinking about making a sex joke. And that's like Happytime Murders. It's like, hey, we made an inappropriate joke. Look, he's having sex with this lady and there's silly string. And it's like, to a certain degree, that is funny, but it's not hilarious because they're not basing this on anything. I feel like this concept in itself isn't bad, and I wish it had worked out, because I think this is a medium that doesn't get to be made quite a lot, especially in today's Hollywood, and in particularly this kind of rating and kind of trying to expand the genre, at least in Hollywood. You know, Team America and Meet the Feebles and all that stuff didn't quite do that, but like if this was a hit, it could be like Sausage Party and people would go, oh hey, there's a precedent for that, this will do well. And it could have really helped, but it doesn't, because I think the direction's sort of off. It's not great. I will say the one thing they get to work right is like puppets walking upright like on their legs. You don't really see that as much, and then when it is done, it doesn't like look natural like you see it on Sesame Street or even in the Muppets movies. It always is like, ugh, like it really never looks right. But in this time they really got it to work. I saw the end credits thing where they had like various puppeteers like covered in like green screen suits and things, and they do a great job of like having those puppets within that world and it actually not looking as weird as usually puppets do when they have them in that world in like the Muppet movies or something. But there's technical things to love about this movie, but I will say I'm just disappointed because this movie's been in development since 2007. People like Cameron Diaz, Katherine Heigl, and before Melissa McCarthy, Jamie Foxx actually, for a while. And I've heard about this movie and I've been always semi-interested, and when it seemed like it was getting made, I got more interested because I was like, oh cool, we get a different kind of movie basically. You know, it had all that time. It couldn't come up with a better script. It couldn't come up with a funnier script. We get this script that doesn't really feel that funny, and even the direction feels like kind of a late August, kind of like, hey, the studio threw me enough money to actually make this sort of thing, and it doesn't feel like a real fine-tuned final edit. It doesn't feel like a filmmaker who really knows filmmaking that well. Brian Henson, who directed Muppet Christmas Carol and Muppet Treasure Island before this. I don't think this movie's like the worst movie of the summer. I don't know what really the worst movie of the summer is. I probably skipped it or something. I don't know. I should probably go back and figure that out. But with Happytime Murders, I like that Jim Henson's son is finding ways to expand the medium. It might not have really worked out at all this time, but I'm glad he's like at least trying. And I think Happytime Murders, when you watch it, you're like, hey, you guys tried. And then you watch it and you're like, oh. And I think that's mainly what you take away from this. I don't think there's any reason to watch this film again. I don't think it's like hilariously funny. I really don't. I don't think it's very funny, to be honest. I don't think it's the worst thing ever, but I don't think it's like that great or good. And I don't think Brian Henson as a director, it's working out too well, because there's certain times I was like, why wasn't that done in one shot? Like, why are we cutting this time? Like, why are we doing, you know, it felt very poorly directed. It felt like a cheaper movie. And I guess that's sort of like what it's trying to do and stuff. It didn't like feel as natural within it. I mean, I don't really like this movie, but I like what it's sort of doing for its medium and trying to expand it. I like that quite a bit. And I think that's really cool, but I don't think this is a movie that's going to do it. It's like, oh, okay, you did it, but like that's as far as we're getting with this, is just this like feeling of accomplishment that, hey, they made this movie and it came out. But I don't think it like makes you really want to see it unless you're sort of into this sort of thing. The writing was very poor, and I think he should have done a much better job, frankly, especially, you know, with finally being able to make this movie. Melissa McCarthy was like pretty normal Melissa McCarthy in this. Her and the puppet don't really have great charisma. Like, if the people who worked on this found a way to work on this script and make it more about something and make it more film noir and make, you know, the whole thing with the Happy Times gang and all that stuff more fleshed out and understand this world. Like, they keep acting like there was a time where they were treated even worse than they are now. What's the context of that? It's very bad at world building, and yet really does need world building. I think Happytime Murders isn't the biggest disaster of the summer, but it's definitely sort of a little up there, because it kind of makes me wish there was more to it. I wish there was more to this movie. I wish this movie was trying to say something, and all it's trying to say is like, look, we're here and we're inappropriate. And I'm like, what do you, that's it? There's nothing more? And like, nope, there's nothing really. And I don't think it breaks new ground or anything. I just think it's good to like remind audiences that this can be done at this point. I'm sure if there's more stop motion animated films in the future, this film will be looked at more fondly. But as someone who saw it, it was like a kind of one and done for me. I think it's like a fine little silly inappropriate movie, but I think I more like it because of the uniqueness of it, because it is getting to breathe rarefied air, because it is getting getting to do things that these kind of movies never get to do. So I give it props for that, and I'm glad they stuck with it after 10 years of development hell and development pictures and going through all that. I'm glad they finally made a Happytime Murders. They've been able to bring an inappropriate puppet movie and kind of like make people think about this medium differently, and I think that in itself is a very good and positive thing this film brings to us. Unfortunately, I can't really be positive at the garbage level of script this is and how it's not really that funny ever. The script they have for this movie is just like nothing more than just fart jokes and fucks and all those things, and it just doesn't demand your attention because it doesn't go more than kind of this surface level thing, and you need to show that your medium can do more of this stuff, but it kind of just doesn't really necessarily show that as well and as properly executed as it necessarily should be. It just kind of makes you like disregard the medium just like it was being disregarded before. It just adds more fuel to that fire because the storytelling is so bad. The execution and the fact that they did it is one thing, but they sort of did it in a way that kind of takes it more back than pushes it forward, unfortunately. So we're kind of just in the same place we were, but with an inappropriate puppet movie, and I don't necessarily think that really turns out to be a great thing. So if you've seen the Happytime Murders and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.